Welcome back, everybody. I'm Brian Holmes, president and lead pastor of Empowered Christian Ministries and author of Ready, Set, Go, a 30-day guide for new believers, faith foundations for the Christian life. This video is being made to help facilitate your one-on-one discipleship or small group discussion time. If you don't have the book yet, get a copy from your church or small group leader, or there's links to all the versions available at empoweredchristian.org/Ready, Set, Go. If you're with your group now, just save the link and order it later. If you have any newcomers to the group, pause the video now and do the short icebreaker that I gave on day 15. All right, let's jump into the lesson. This week, we're discussing what you read, day 23, the life and ministry of Jesus, from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the first four Gospels. Now, this begins our entrance into the New Testament, and its contents span about 85 years from around circa 4 BC to AD 70, or some prefer the later date of 96. Sort of took the average there. I personally believe that the last book was written in AD 70. There's 27 books total in the New Testament. The first four are the accounts of Jesus' life and ministry, and then there's the book of Acts, which is a history of the development, spread, and challenges of the early church. And then there's the 22 epistles or letters written by the apostles and leaders to the early churches. This week, we looked at the first four books, which are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, also called the Gospels for short. This lesson, what I did was I sort of consolidated all four of these Gospels so that in a short, concise way, you could understand the big picture of what these books teach. First, I gave a comparison of who wrote each of these books, who they were, when they were written, and who they were written for. Then I unpacked different aspects of what is in the actual Gospels themselves, from Jesus' birth, parts of his ministry, certain things that he taught, the final events of his life, and so forth. And we'll look at each of these in turn. First, we compared the four Gospels themselves. The first one was Matthew. He was a Jew writing to mostly Jewish readers, written circa AD 50 to 65. He emphasizes Jesus' Jewishness and points to how he was the long-awaited Messiah and descendant of the heir of the covenant of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and David. Then we looked at John Mark, who wrote his gospel between AD 50 and 60, primarily to Gentiles, the non-Jews living in Rome, suffering the persecution. And even though he was just a young boy during Jesus' ministry, he later became the apprentice to the Apostle Peter, traveling with him. And so Peter's account and perspective is shared through Mark's lesson. But really, Mark is very fast-paced. Many believe it was the first of the Gospels to be written, and about 40% of it focuses on Jesus' final week. And so it's a lot faster paced and quickly moves through the events and teachings, giving much less detail than either Matthew or Luke's accounts. Luke wrote his later. He wasn't part of Jesus' earthly ministry. He became an apostle through his conversion by the Apostle Paul. He wrote his book in AD 59 to 62, and also wrote his for a broader audience, primarily Gentiles. But you could tell he really was a meticulous scholar and historian. You see his doctor credentials, even with the way he did his writing. And I quoted some of the first parts of his book that just show you how seriously he took his authorship. And then the last book we looked at was John, and he refers himself as the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was one of Jesus's 12, as well as one of his inner core 3. And he experienced several events that none of the other authors experienced firsthand. He wrote this about 65 to 70 AD. Some do prefer the 95 AD later dating, but I believe the 70 AD is the right one, which culminates with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. And he also wrote with those teaching Gnosticism in mind and those struggling with these Greek philosophies. And so, since he wrote probably last out of all of these gospel accounts, John sought not to repeat things that were already well known and spread around, but to expose the errors that people were teaching about Jesus and to confront the false teachings being taught in this Gnostic movement. And so he wrote specifically to correct those errors, to clear up confusion about who Jesus is, and to more clearly uh, teach how we are saved. And he even states his intent at the end of his gospel account in John 20, verse 31. These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. So before we unpack what is actually in the rest of these gospels, let's first just open up the conversation about how these compare and the ways that reflects in the way that we read it. Just remember, we're understanding the context. Who wrote this? To whom did they write it? And how that flavors the way that it's written and the way that they want their audience to receive it. So I asked at the end of your journaling assignment to pick one of these books and read part of it based on what seemed interesting or what you feel the Lord drawing you to. So let's just go around the room, start with the host, and then just go around the room, take turns, about 60 to 90 seconds or so. Just share which book you read and what part of that book and how that is flavored by the author and who they were and how it might compare to some of the other authors. And so just talk about that. Let everybody go and share what they read and what they thought about it and just have a conversation about that. And then we'll come back in a minute and keep going through the rest of these gospels. All right. So now that we have looked at the different books, now we're going to dive into the content of what's actually in the books. I began with a section on the early life of Jesus. This is not in all of the Gospels, and so you have to know exactly where to look for it. One of the things that I did in my lesson is I summarized many of the key things that you want to know about the life and ministry of Jesus, and I kind of lay it all out in almost list format, and then I tell you where you can find it in the 4 books, right? What book and what chapter it's in. So this way you can quickly navigate and find exactly what you need to find, as well as have a quick overview of all the important stuff just by this one lesson. So the first thing we looked at was the early life of Jesus, and this is we see important parts in John 1, as well as other parts of Jesus' earthly life in Luke 1 and 2. We learn about his adopted father in Matthew 1, and some of the ways he is connected to Adam through his human mother, Mary, in his genealogy in Luke 3. So just go around the room and share any thoughts you have about that, if that is one of the sections that you focused on reading. And if not, just come back and we'll keep going. All right, next we looked at the public ministry of Jesus. Everything from when he was first baptized by John the Baptist in Matthew 3, his wilderness temptation, his calling of the apostles, the wedding at Cana, turning water into wine, meeting Nicodemus, going and visiting the Samaritan woman, and other things, including a section on when he did a bunch of healings and a bunch of deliverance. And so I highlighted a bunch of these key events and gave you the specific chapters where they occurred in. We also looked at how he had authority over spirits and illness, and even how he imparted this not only to the 12 apostles, but even to the 70 disciples, who also went out healing and casting out demons as well. And I cited the chapters for those things. And then we looked at his power over nature. And I cited a bunch of the miracles that he did, calming the storm, rebuking the wind and waves, multiplying fish and loaves, raising people from the dead, and so forth. We looked at some of his clashes against the religious leaders, being rejected by his hometown in Nazareth, Peter's statement of faith, that on that statement of faith, he will build his church and the gates of Hades will not overcome it in Matthew chapter 16, foretelling of his own death, and his transfiguration. So if any of those are things that you guys read, let's open that up for conversation. Just start with the host and go around the room taking turns. If this is a section that you read in that you went into detail on, just share your thoughts about what you read and kind of unpack that and discuss it as a group, and then come back after you're done with that. Next, we look at Jesus's teachings and his parables. We looked at the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 through 7. We looked at how he had authority, not as the teachers of the law. He talked about everything about seeking first the kingdom, when a demon leaves a person, comparing Mary and Martha, teaching the rich young ruler an important lesson, having childlike faith, church discipline, forgiveness, divorce, singleness, and celibacy. He also talked about surrendering to God and equality in his kingdom. I gave a section where he taught about himself, right? How he is so many things. He elevates and fulfills the law of Moses. He carries the heavy load on our behalf. He's the bread of life, the good shepherd, the way, the truth, and the life, the vine that we can't bear good fruit without, the Lord of the Sabbath. He said Moses wrote about him. And he said, Abraham saw him and rejoiced. So when people say that Jesus only did wise teachings, he didn't claim to be God, it's just not true, right? As C.S. Lewis once said, Jesus didn't give us the option that he was just a wise moral teacher. He is either the king and lord of the universe, or he's a lunatic. He has not left us a middle option. He claimed to be God. And then we have a section about his parables, and I list out most of his parables: the hidden treasure, the pearl, the net, the lost sheep, the two sons, the sheep and the goats, the talents, the 10 virgins, the great banquet, the lost sheep, the lost coin, the prodigal son, the rich man and Lazarus, the unjust judge, the Pharisee and the tax collector, and others. So if you have any thoughts, if the time you spent was on one of his teachings, one of his parable sections, let's go ahead and open that up for conversation and share your thoughts, and let's talk about it. All right, and then last but most certainly not least, in fact, perhaps most important, are Jesus's last days. So I summarized all of this into one section to make it easy to find everything, exactly what book it's in, what chapters are in what book. This is everything from him coming into Jerusalem riding on a donkey, receiving praise as the Messiah, cleansing the temple of the money changers, pronouncing woes on the current leadership, prophesying the temple to be torn down, and describing the signs of the end times, Judas betraying Jesus, the last Passover meal or the Last Supper, his arrest at Gethsemane, the mock trial before the Sanhedrin, Peter's denial of Christ, his appearance before both Pilate and Herod, his false condemnation, and his crucifixion, his burial, and then his resurrection and multiple appearances and Great Commission. And so if you spent time reading one of those sections, let's go around the room, share what section, what you thought, what impressions it gave you, and let's have a conversation about it. All right, so that finishes our lesson on the 4 Gospels and our discussion of it. I pray that it has blessed you and has made you hungry to go and read these scriptures for yourself. We need to soak it up. This is the life and ministry of our Lord and Savior, our King, our Messiah. He's our life. He's everything. If you haven't already, go and visit empoweredchristian.org/ready, set, go. Check out our e-course version where you can leave any comments, testimonies. Let me know how this content is blessing you. Let me know if this is the first time you're really starting to unpack these things and you're seeing the big picture. Even before you read all the minor details, you see the big picture. You know where to find everything, and you know what's in there, and you know where to go to learn more about it. Also, the link there in our YouTube channel. Go and leave comments there. Share the news. Let people know that the content is blessing you so that they can find it and be a part of it as well. This week, we're going to be reading day 24, the early church history and teaching. So this is going to cover the other 23 books, the rest of the New Testament. All right, everything from the book of Acts all the way to the book of Revelation. And so I'm excited to talk about that one with you next week. So read that, and then we'll see you next week. God bless.